Lesson 44, pronouns. You know, Catherine, I've always been told that a pronoun is a word that takes the place of a noun.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are both Latinists, so you and I have a lot of training in Latin. And one day I was thinking about the word pro and how the word pro in Latin can mean in place of or instead of. And then it clicked for me that the word pronoun actually means in place of a noun, right?
It's literally in the name.
Yeah. It's not an amateur noun. It's a pro noun. It's a professional noun. No, I'm just kidding. But literally pro means in place of.
Right.
And the word noun here, I guess it comes from the Latin word nomen, which means name.
Mm-hmm.
So if something is pronominal, it's pronoun oriented, right?
Yes, exactly. It's relating to a pronoun.
Like in Hebrew, you have pronominal suffixes.
Oh, right.
Which is basically pronouns in the form of a suffix.
So they get tacked on at the end of a word instead of being a separate word.
So pronouns are words like he, she, it, I, we, you, they.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these words can take the place of a noun. Here in our example sentence, Suzanne is wearing a blue dress. Instead of saying in the second sentence, Suzanne bought the dress last week, we can say she bought the dress last week. We can replace the word Suzanne with the word she. And so in that sense, she is a pronoun in the sense that it's taking the place of a noun.
Right. And it creates a better flow and makes prose a lot less repetitive than saying the person's name over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, we don't repeat ourselves, and we don't say the same thing over and over again, and we're not redundant. A friend of mine that I used to work with was very interested in the German language. So sometimes when we had a break, we would sit around and talk about German. And I mentioned one day that a pronoun takes the place of a noun. And he says, "Oh, really? Well, what does I take the place of?" And he had me stumped. I sat there and thought about it for a minute. And he said the same thing about you. What do I and you take the place of? If they're taking the place of something. And it really made me think. And the best I could come up with is that it takes the place of the person's name. Mm-hmm. Instead of naming the person, you can say the pronoun. I mean, what do you think about that?
I agree. It definitely takes the place of the person's name. You see the importance of pronouns taking the place of people's names for I and you in actually Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, because so many characters in that play talk about themselves in the third person. So Caesar will talk about himself, but he won't say, I will do this or I will do that. He will say, Caesar will go to the Senate today. And it sounds really weird because we're used to hearing people talk about themselves in the first person, like, I will do this, I will do that. But Caesar doesn't do that. He talks about himself as if he were a different person. And it's jarring because we're used to that I pronoun, but we don't hear it.
Interesting. I think for me, if I heard someone doing that, I would just think they're speaking in the third person. Like if I'm a caveman going to Starbucks, which is a weird situation, but if I say, Bill, go Starbucks.
Right.
That could be, instead of I'm going to Starbucks, Bill going to Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, the word I could replace the person's name. Gronk, whatever the caveman's name is.
Right. And similarly for you, if Grok's friend is talking about Grok, then it becomes, instead of Grok go to Starbucks, it's you go to Starbucks. And so again, it's replacing that person's name.
Well, let's take them through a couple of these exercises before we go. Number 1, Alfred's room is a mess because he never cleans up. So the challenge for our readers is to identify the pronoun, and if the pronoun is taking the place of another word, figure out the word that it's taking the place of. So in number 1, what would you say?
So the pronoun for number 1 is he, and he here is replacing the word Alfred, rather than saying Alfred's room is a mess because Alfred never cleans up, which would be redundant. We say Alfred's room is a mess because he never cleans up, because it's very clear whom we're referring to.
Right. So the first part of the sentence sets up the person that it's referring to. And really, in grammatical terms, that kind of word has a name. It's called an antecedent.
And that actually has Latin roots too, because ante means before and cedo means like to come or to proceed. So it's the word that literally comes before the pronoun, because most of the time it is before the pronoun.
And we see that same root word in words like precedent or precede.
Proceed, succeed.
So Alfred is the antecedent, and then he is the pronoun that refers back to that antecedent.
Exactly.
Number 2, Jeff does not like going to the locker room because it is too smelly. This is inspired by actual experiences.
Oh, yes. But here, it is the pronoun. And it is referring to the locker room. Because in English, we indicate the gender, I guess, of whatever the antecedent is by which pronoun we pick. So it, the locker room is a thing. So we know it refers to things and it cannot refer to Jeff because Jeff is a person. So the locker room is the antecedent and it is the pronoun.
Right. We have gender in English too. We have, grammatical gender, but it's a lot less than in ancient Greek,
Yeah.
Typically, the word it is for just inanimate objects of any kind.
Well, it doesn't affect the endings of the noun so much.
We have a very simplified kind of grammatical gender in English. It's extremely rudimentary,
And it tends to map onto natural gender a lot more easily.
Right. Because it's so limited.
Right.
Let's do one more because number 3 has a special characteristic to it. She already went to school. Catherine, what's special about this one? What characteristic does this one have that the other two we looked at did not have?
Well, here, she is the pronoun, but here we don't really know what the antecedent is because there's no feminine word that we can refer back to as the antecedent of she. She stands by itself. And we can do that in English. Now, in this sentence, because we have no context, we don't really know whom it's referring to. But in a paragraph, we would know.
And that's exactly what I had in mind, is there's no antecedent for she. There's no context. We don't know who it's referring to. So the lesson to be learned here is that sometimes a pronoun will have an antecedent that's clear, and other times it won't. There's just no context. In number 4, we have kids as the antecedent, and then later on, they is a pronoun that refers back to the kids. Johnny is the antecedent in number 5, and then that antecedent is referred back to by the word he. In number 6, we is the subject of the sentence, and that's a pronoun. There's no antecedent, it's just the pronoun we. So there's a variety of ways you can use pronouns, and we'll actually talk a bit more about pronouns in an upcoming lesson. So we'll get to re-examine this issue a little bit in the future.